our classrooms are full of diverse learners. And so that one-size-fits-all traditional environment is bound not to work. So what I want parents to understand is that you do not have to feel ashamed. Your child did not fail. They are not bad. Nothing is wrong. You've got to build that relationship first, because that's what creates that safety for students and that openness to learn. Not uncommon for our families coming in that full desperation, saying, my kid has not gone to school in months. We don't know what to do. And the student just needed some safety. And by providing that safety, then they were able to show their brilliance. If we have somebody who's listening and hasn't started, yes. Is it going to feel like a little bit of an uphill climb? Certainly. But that will level out over time.
At public school, I felt abandoned. I felt kind of left to my own devices and told to figure everything out on my own.
We definitely felt let down by the traditional school environment for our son. We had approached them with our concerns several times and nothing really changed. So they really did not make an effort to individualize and bring out the best in Charlie.
My lead teacher, my special ed teacher who was helping me, he used the phrase, C's get degrees. Hearing the teacher who's supposed to help me viewing me as a C student felt really hard. Every day I felt more and more drained as the comments about my success, my intelligence, my grades just kept eating away at me.
We knew our son was really bright, but the school just wasn't seeing that. Instead, they were writing him off. And we were really sad and a bit hopeless, because we knew that he had the intelligence, the passion, the desire to learn. But in that environment, it was just not bringing that out in him, and it was not possible for him to achieve his potential.
At my traditional school, what I really needed was teachers who understood me and understood how I learned best.
Traditional school is one size fits all, and it did not fit Charlie.
What if school wasn't something students had to survive, but instead something designed for who they truly are? In this season finale of Learning Differently, we sit down with Joie Laykoff to explore what personalized education really looks like and why it's so powerful for students with learning, social, and emotional differences. We'll talk about what makes one-to-one education so effective, why traditional systems struggle to meet individual needs, and how we can scale personalization without losing what makes it powerful. You'll hear stories of transformation and walk away with a new vision for what school can be when we build it around students instead of asking students to fit into it. Joie has a degree in special education, and she has served as an autism behavioral therapist and has over 14 years of experience in developing teachers and school administrators in the art of personalized learning. Joie, welcome to the show. Hello, it's so good to be here. Thank you. So we, the three of us, share a deep passion for personalized learning. And I just hot off the jump here have to say, I think, we're doing a disservice to kids if, as educators and as a society, we're not asking ourselves the question, what if there was a better way to learn?
Yep.
And the three of us have been in a traditional classroom before. My largest classroom was 40-1. And I know that educators really feel a challenge in meeting every student where they are and where they need to be. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what personalized education means and what it looks like in practice?
Sure. And I'll tell you, I'm right there with the two of you. I spent years in a traditional setting, not quite 40-1, but my background is in special education. And I look longingly back to my time in the classroom when I had, about 13 students in the classroom, all with different needs. So I'm coming from having that experience to now for well over a decade working in personalized education. So I think the best way to talk about personalized education is really to think about the whole child and looking at academics, social, emotional. So I think the term personalized education really speaks for itself. I would imagine that most people understand what that means. But I think oftentimes when we talk about it, we might just think about academics and the way that personalized education looks for learning. But I think it's important that we widen the scope and we think about personalized education in terms of the social and emotional needs of our students as well. So a couple good examples of this. Let's start with the academic piece. A great example for academics, and again, I think this is the one that our audience is probably most familiar with, but it may be how we're handling the pacing of students' learning, right? So we could speed things up, we could slow things down. It could be the way that we're assessing students' learning. Are we doing that in a more traditional way or a more conversational way? Those are some things that we can do to personalize education within the academic realm. But again, I think the thing that a lot of people don't consider is that holistic approach. So also emotionally, given everything that's going on in this world and the mental health crises that our adolescents are facing, it's really important that we're personalizing the emotional aspect for our students as well. So how are we making sure that an environment is safe for them, that they are feeling at ease and calm and reassured and ready to learn? So that emotional piece can be really personalized. And then finally, I just want to cap that off with the social part. So again, we talked about academics and the emotional piece, but so much of our kids' identity, and we remember this from being adolescents, is wrapped up in their social experience. And so also, how are we ensuring that our personalized education is teaching them social skills? It doesn't have to be a separate curriculum, which a lot of times people feel intimidated by, but things like perspective taking and social management and self-awareness. So I think going back to the original question, what is personalized education, is meeting our students where they're at, but it's doing it in a holistic way, considering academic, social, and emotional needs.
Joie, I think that makes so much sense. But why do you think personalized education is so rare in traditional schooling?
So let's talk about that for a second, because personalized education is certainly the ideal, I think, for every student. Of course, whenever things are more personalized, even as like a customer experience, we're able to really cater to what someone needs. And when we look at a traditional environment, we have teachers that are in classrooms of, as you, Lynna, had just mentioned, 40 students, 30 students, even 10. My classroom was somewhere around 15 students. And it is natural to take the most efficient approach to meet the needs of the greatest number of students in the classroom. So the way that the system is set up doesn't necessarily allow us to create a personalized experience for students. And so what ends up happening is you say, okay, what's the thing that I can do that's going to meet the needs of the majority of my students in here? And then the afterthought becomes, okay, given the outliers and the students that I wasn't able to meet the needs for, now how can I create some supplemental experiences to meet their needs? So I want to be really clear. This is no fault of the teachers. This is the way that the environment is set up. It's really hard to do. Personalized education requires intention, flexibility, time. I think our teachers want to do that. It's just difficult in that environment. So we can talk a little bit more about some strategies that I think in a traditional classroom you can use, but so it's not impossible, but it is difficult in that environment.
So as families are looking at alternative learning environments, what do you wish that every parent knew as they're thinking about the options for their child? And they've now, started learning about personalized learning, and they want to hear more. They want to discover more.
So I think the biggest thing for me in the work that I do, I spent many years as a head of school. And I work for Fusion Academy. I was a head of school at our Los Angeles location. And every family that came in had this feeling that something had gone wrong and that a failure had happened. And that is not necessarily the case. In fact, oftentimes it is not the case. And what I want parents to know is that a traditional environment can work for a child who is neurotypical, who is self-disciplined, who is compliant, And that is not the majority of our kids' bottom line. So what I want parents to understand is that you do not have to feel ashamed that your child did not fail. They are not bad. Nothing is wrong. And alternative programs are, in fact, now gaining in such popularity. They're here to serve the majority of our kids. Our classrooms are full of diverse learners. And so that one-size-fits-all traditional environment is bound not to work. In fact, I say to a lot of my friends now, I want you to go in and expect that traditional environment won't work. And I just want you to know that there are so many other options out there. And when it's not working, there is nothing wrong with your child. That's the thing that I want families to know, because I'd like families to be exploring those options earlier. So the other thing I want to mention here that I think is important is because of that narrative that there was a failure or that something went wrong, and there's a little bit of that shame associated with it, then in some of these alternative environments that are able to be more personalized, we don't get to see the students until they're in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but oftentimes that's too late than I'd like to be seeing them.
Right. And Joie, as you meet with families, as you start to develop teachers, what are some of the needs that are appearing for students in a traditional classroom that would lead a family to thinking differently about school?
So I think there's a lot of things that can crop up in a student's learning, but I want to point out the thing that I think is a little bit of a canary in the coal mine here, because I think the learning piece is the one that you will often see first. Either it's through teacher reports, or it might be through the grades that a student is earning, or the test scores that they're receiving. But I think the thing that we actually have to be on the lookout for is the decrease in confidence with our kids. So when we start to hear that negative self-talk, that they don't feel capable, or when we start to notice that their interest in school is waning, that is our cue to investigate a bit more and to understand what's going on at school that isn't fueling them with confidence, that isn't engaging them, that isn't leveraging their creativity or their strengths. So what happens, I'll tell you, when students join our program, and I would imagine many times when students are pulled out of a traditional environment and start a program that's different, the interesting thing is we'll hear from the students that they're a bit reticent because they know it's different. And, kids don't want to be different. Our biggest goal as teenagers is to fit in. You don't want to be different. And yet what you'll hear, even within the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, is you'll start to hear from kids that they didn't realize they were good at something. So it may be that they had been struggling in their math class or with writing or what have you. And then suddenly, like, oh my gosh, I have these skills and maybe I do actually enjoy this. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but all that to say, the first thing to look at is that decrease in confidence.
And I think, just as a follow-up to that, I think it's such I would say, a neurodiverse affirming practice to give permission to families to start thinking differently about school, and also to tune in to the needs of their child in that way. Like something as small as seeing the impact or the change in confidence in your child over time. It's almost as though it allows a permission in a way, which is, I think, so powerful. And I'm seeing more and more of that as personalized learning options, pop up and families are thinking differently about traditional schooling. So it's great to see. And I think for families that are experiencing those challenges, that type of affirmation to think differently is really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll say too, it's understandable because even for me, and I don't know about the two of you, but I went to a traditional school. So the thought of our children going to a school unlike what we experienced, it's natural for that unfamiliarity to bring up a sense of concern and worry. And so I love what you said, because there's that invitation and that reassurance that it's okay. And I want to normalize for families that alternative education is an absolutely acceptable and certainly not inferior option.
Yes, agree.
So, Joey, I'm going to break all the rules of how my wife is trying to train me. She's telling me all the time that I go too quick to solve, right? But I want to help, right? And I know that we have educators in our audience. How do you think schools can scale that personalization without sacrificing institutional quality?
I think there's a lot of things that we can do. And if we split it up into technology and professional development, that might be a good way of looking at it, because it's hard to talk about personalization right now without getting into AI. And there are a lot of digital platforms out there that can support our students, that can be implemented at any school. And mind you, I say support our students, but support our teachers as well in helping our students make up whatever delta exists and to build fluency with skills. AI and these digital platforms will never replace a teacher, but I do think there's an opportunity for our school systems to look at how can we adopt supplemental digital platforms that achieve greater personalization. Now, at Fusion, we do one-to-one. So for us, that's easy, but that's not possible everywhere. And I also don't want people to mistakenly think that because you're not one-to-one or because you're not small group, then you can't do personalization. You can. So I think those digital platforms is one place to start. I think the other piece is if we turn our attention to professional development, there's a lot of opportunities. And I want to go back to the way that I defined personalized education in that first question, which were the 3 pillars of academic, social, and emotional. So when we provide our teachers with resources and training for personalization, there are plentiful strategies within each of those buckets that teachers can employ. I don't need to go through an exhaustive list, but I'll just point out a couple that I think are really helpful. One being giving teachers, to use that term that we used just a moment ago, that permission to build relationships. I think sometimes we forget that the relationship is at the heart of personalization. So at Fusion, we call that love. We're a little, call it kind of brave with the way that we talk about it, but we say that is at the foundation of what we do. We say you've got to build that relationship first, because that's what creates that safety for students and that openness to learn. But every teacher can do that. It's just prioritizing it. So checking in with your students every day, reassuring them, understanding what's going on in their lives, being their cheerleader, maybe a little bit of a mindfulness practice if that's something that you're comfortable with. It could be a creative handshake that you start with all of your students, a bit of a check-in following an assignment to see how they felt about that. So could be actually one of my favorite ones is an interactive journal in the classroom, and that's very easy to do in a traditional classroom. So I think that's one piece as far as professional development. But moving to a couple of others, there are pedagogical strategies that in a traditional environment are easy to employ. One great example is the power of feedback. And are we taking the time to give feedback to our students that is specific to their work? Are we reminding them of the goal? Are we telling them what they did that was on track, off track, strategies? And so a short 2 to 4 minute touch base with students to talk about the quality of their work. So again, I can go on and on with the strategies, but I think that the point here is we can do personalization in every setting. Maybe it's not small group, maybe it's not one-to-one, but if you just ask the question, what does it look like for me as a teacher or for our school to personalize more effectively? I think you can look at both digital platforms to support, and you can look at pedagogy. Let me say one more thing that just came up for me, because I mentioned AI a couple of times. Personally, I use AI all the time. And I think that has really allowed our teachers to plan most efficiently. And you can take a lesson plan, put it into whatever AI platform you want, and say, here's kind of a description of the 3 different types of students that I have in the classroom. Can you help me? Give me some strategies for how I can personalize for these groups of students. So that's just another suggestion there.
That's awesome, because my next question was going to lead to just give us some more tools in terms of innovative platforms. But you and I, before we hit the record button on this podcast, we were talking about you learning Spanish and how you've utilized AI platforms, yet the teacher, your one-on-one tutor that you utilize once a week, still plays such a pivotal role. Tell us some more about that interplay in terms of like technology and the human element.
All right, putting me on the spot here. So truth is, my husband is pretty fluent in Spanish, and I'm pretty sure my 2.5-year-old knows more Spanish than I do. And so I decided this year that it was going to be my goal. I was determined to become more fluent in Spanish. I'm certainly not expecting myself to master the language, but I'd given myself this secondary gift of having firsthand experience of both the power of a digital platform like a Duolingo or Quizlet that can help me build fluency. But then there's, as you and I were discussing earlier, there's the practical application where I meet with my tutor every week, and she's the one that calls me to the carpet, and I've got to put my learning into play. And so nothing is ever going to take the place of a teacher, but having those two things in partnership has been really helpful for my own learning. So I encourage schools and teachers to look into how both of those things can blend together to support student learning.
And Joie, I'm really curious too, because now, I mean, there are schools that are using AI to completely supplement teachers. So again, in the age of AI, and as we're using some of those tools and those agents, in your opinion, what is missing when we're just using singular focus on AI to teach some of this information?
The thing that comes to mind for me right now that we have to be really careful about is our students are spending more and more time away from people, away from outdoors, and in front of a screen. And we know that that is not the best for their well-being. I want to start by saying that because while I think that these digital platforms can be very helpful, we have to be careful to not look at that as a panacea. And let's go back to the importance of when we talked about personalized education. It was also about the social and emotional aspects. Now, there are also digital platforms that help students develop social emotional skills, but that relationship building with your teacher is really core to our students feeling a sense of confidence. And I think teachers also help bring curriculum to life in a way that a digital platform can't. And the thing that comes to mind for me most is utilizing a student's interests and passions and really being able to tailor it to that in such an organic way. So there are a lot of reasons why AI and digital platforms won't take the place of a teacher, but I do think the question is important because what it encourages us, I'll include myself, educators and teachers to do is ensure that those things that are central to the role of a teacher that no technology can ever replace, that we're truly leveraging that. So if you are out there and either your child is in a classroom where they don't feel that they have a connection with their teacher, or you are a teacher yourself and you're feeling totally bogged down by the number of students in your classroom, this is the piece that we need to focus on. How are we building those connections? And if you are a parent listening, that is the conversation that you want to be having with your teachers. How are they knowing your child?
I think that connection piece it's so critical, right? Because it's not just a feel-good thing. It's actually what our brains need, right? So we know that if we're dysregulated, our brains are firing, our amygdala, the alarm system is keeping us from accessing the parts of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, right, that allows us to reason and be creative and have all of this, the knowledge that we want to bring forward. And so it is not just a feel-good thing. It's actually what our brains need to unlock a child's complete potential.
And you know what? That is oftentimes a situation that we find ourselves in with our students, where there is truly this fear around learning. And when they step into our classrooms and we just start with the relationship first and we build the trust, then they're ready to learn. Then it's almost as though you've unlocked their ability to access their knowledge and their skills. And I mean, that's the case for all of us, right? We put ourselves in a stressful situation and suddenly we're like, oh my gosh, I can't, what's the name of that thing? And, we can't remember
me all the time.
Yeah, I can't remember what I wanted to say. And so when we have that rise in cortisol, it can block our learning. And so first things first, team, we need to make students feel seen and heard and valued. Nothing else will happen until that happens.
Yeah, so powerful. What parent doesn't want that, right? For their child to be seen and known and heard. It's so critical.
But I think about that, Joey. As a former principal and a former teacher in a traditional school setting, I'm thinking about 30 kids in a classroom at a time. Lynna had 40. I'm thinking about not only do I have that one class of 30, but I possibly could have 5, 6 sections of that class. And what we're saying, I know that we're saying that personalized learning works. We're looking for a student-centered approach. Where else do you see this clash between the traditional setting and truly being able to deliver personalized student-centered learning?
Well, I think it's a little bit of what I said earlier, where to no fault of teachers, but the most efficient thing to do is to teach to the greatest number of students. And so where I think that clashes with student-centered learning is all about students having agency and choice and voice. I don't think that those things need to clash. And I think there are plenty of opportunities where, I didn't mention this as one of the strategies, but one of the easiest strategies in a classroom is to give students a choice of something, right? So it could be as simple as, would you like to take this type of assessment or this type of assessment? Maybe, do you want to put together a diorama or would you like to take a paper test? Or when you come in and we have a prompt up on the board for you to answer, would you like to draw your response or would you like to write your response? Or heck, do you want to act it out? So I don't think those two things need to clash, but I think it is a bit of a mindset shift to think about, what does student voice and choice and agency look like in my classroom? And I think we spend a lot of time evaluating our teaching and not enough time evaluating the learning that's happening. And I would just invite us to switch that. What is the learning that's happening? Because that is reflective of your teaching.
And I think when you mention different choices in assessment, right? Because assessment is what we talk about in schools and being able to gauge whether students learned a thing. When you mention things like singing or dancing or drawing, there can still be rigor behind that, right? And I think that we do it well at Fusion. Can you talk a little bit more about how we actually assess with fidelity whether or not a student's learning? Because most oftentimes we think, your traditional multiple choice exam or writing an essay, right? Those have rubrics to it. But how do we arm teachers with the ability to assess learning outcomes based off of different types of assessment?
So I think what I'm about to say, for any teachers in listening, they'll go, yeah, this is what we do. But it might be useful information for others. And if you're a teacher out there and you don't do this, then, maybe this is a practice you can take up. But what we do is we train our teachers in backwards design. And you can have any creative assessment that you'd like, and as many options of creative assessments as you'd like, as long as you are driven by your objectives on the front end, because that is where you maintain your integrity. So as a teacher, when we're planning, we say, okay, what are the outcomes of the lesson? What are the objectives? And for us, we have our curriculum that outlines all of our student abilities. And that is what we call stage 1 of backwards design. And then stage 2 is determining what is that assessment. And so what we don't want to do is say stage 2, the assessment is a traditional assessment, and then you go on to teach, and then you decide on the back end, maybe we won't use that assessment, we'll just use another assessment, because you haven't actually tested yet that aligns with your outcomes. But as long as from the very beginning you say, we're going to have these 3 or 4 choices of assessments, however wacky you want to get, as long as if a student demonstrates that it meets your outcomes, then run with it, have fun with it.
And what I feel like a teacher hearing that sound, they're going to think, oh my gosh, that's great, but I have to grade for a class all these different types of assessments. And that's probably why we came up with standardized testing in the first place, right? It's really easy to grade right or wrong, or even those poor English teachers with their rubrics having to go through every single essay and being able to mark certain spots and checks on there. Is this where AI could help us, or other sort of innovative technologies, and sort of being able to streamline that assessment? Is that what you're saying? Or am I completely getting that wrong, Joey?
You're not getting it wrong. I think AI can do two things. It can help you create that rubric, and then it can also help you give feedback on a student's assessment. But I'll also just say that for many teachers, we're teaching the same subject area. You had mentioned earlier, Mike, that you taught multiple periods of the same subject area or over multiple years. And so these are things that get housed in your repository. So personalizing education, while probably more work and intention and flexibility, as I mentioned on the front end, you start to build up those strategies and it becomes a really fluid process. So if we have somebody who's listening and hasn't started, yes. Is it going to feel like a little bit of an uphill climb? Certainly, but that will level out over time.
Yeah. And what are some of those success stories, Joey? What are some of those success stories that you can think of that have really convinced you that this personalized education approach works?
Okay, so you all are catching me at graduation season. And so this is actually a little hard because at our school, all of our students give their own graduation speeches, and there is never a dry eye in the room. And they all, by the way, talk about what I mentioned earlier, where there was this initial hesitancy in starting an alternative program, but they are always stories of triumph. There are a lot of students that come to mind for me. I shared earlier that I was ahead of school at our Los Angeles location. Probably one in particular that I can speak to. And this student had come to us and was dealing with a lot of things, as many students are. It's oftentimes not just one difficulty. And so this student was dealing with a lot of anxiety and was having a very hard time in the STEM subjects, was going to a local public school. And the parents, let's not forget, were going through some things within the family dynamic. And so I think that was an added stress. So they came in for an intake with me, and this student was in 10th grade, had not been attending school. So I also want to say, as I share this story, for any of you out there that have a middle schooler or a teenager right now that is not attending school at all, that is okay. They will come back with the appropriate interventions, and there is an opportunity to progress. Let me just share that. And so this was one of those cases, and it took us a couple of weeks, and my office as a head of school was the only safe place for this student. And every time they would feel anxious, it was because it just happened to be that in our school, my office had a little corner where no students could walk by and see them. And you couldn't see them through windows. So my office became this space. And there was a particular teacher that they ended up connecting with, and this teacher's name is Sarah. And through that relationship, they would start to go to more of their classes and not hang out in my office as much. And, built connections with all of their teachers, never missed a day of school, ended up finishing 10th, 11th, 12th grade, going on to a 4-year university, was a stellar student. And you know what? One of the brightest students that we have ever had. And one of the most incredible speeches I've ever heard at a graduation. And it makes me feel emotional now because when I think back to the state that family was in, which is not uncommon for our families, coming in that full desperation, saying my kid has not gone to school in months and we don't know what to do. And mind you, by the way, we didn't figure out, it wasn't one thing, but there were a series of things that had happened in that program, and the student just needed some safety. And by providing that safety, then they were able to show their brilliance And I'm still in touch with that student to this day. And I love telling their story. So thank you for asking that.
Joey, we want to help the educators out there, and we want to be able to give them some tips and tricks about how to prepare for this fundamental shift towards personalized learning. And I've heard a couple things, right? I've heard professional development is key. I've heard also the permission to be able to give the grace of time for teachers to build that toolbox of personalized learning and student choice. What else do you think is out there for us, our educators out there?
So educators are ready. I want us to have all the faith in the world about our educators. They want to do what's best for their students. So it's really energizing the conversation and talking about, again, asking that open-ended question I mentioned earlier. What could personalizing your classrooms look like? And what resources do you need to do that? And what professional development do you need? How are you building relationships? Let's share best practices. Let's collaboratively plan. So I think really educators don't need anything other than some vision setting and resources, and let's go. Because once they start to see that success and they know what that success looks like for their student, they're on that train. They're ready to rock. And so our teachers got into this profession because they want to see our students succeed. And the system itself with 30, 40 kids in a classroom is what is their biggest obstacle. So if we can break down some of those walls and say, okay, we're going to provide some more resources or some more supplemental tools or some different types of professional development, or we're going to look at some different success metrics and we're going to invite you in to co-create this. Teachers are ready for that. So I shared strategies earlier. I want everyone to remember that personalized education is not just about academics, although there are loads of strategies that we can be employing. But I want teachers to remember that personalized education is all about knowing your students, and you cannot even begin until you know your kids. So start there.
Yeah. And having the hope that you can make a difference one student at a time, right? Because I don't know if have you both heard of the starfish story? This reminds me, have you heard the starfish story? So I'll just tell it really quickly. It's there was a young boy on the beach. He's like surrounded by starfish, hundreds of starfish, and he's just taking one starfish at a time and launching them into the ocean. And he just bends down, takes one at a time, and just keeps throwing each starfish into the ocean. And there's an older man who comes up to him. He's been observing him for some time, and he says, "Why are you doing that?" And so the little boy said, "Well, the sun is out, it's hot, and the tide is low. So if I don't throw these starfish in, they're going to die." And so the old man looks around. He said, "Well, that's ridiculous. There's hundreds of starfish here." He looks down the beach. Like, there's miles of beach. So that means there's thousands of starfish. You're never going to make a difference. It's not going to be enough.
You're not going to save them all.
It's not going to be enough. And so the little boy just bends down. He picks up one starfish and he launches that starfish. And as it hit the water, he looked up at the old man and he said, "Well, I made a difference for that one." And I heard this story probably 12 years ago, and it stayed with me because as a teacher, sometimes you feel like you can't do enough. But if you focus on, one student at a time, you can really make a difference, and you can save that one child, make that change for the one child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that story.
Yeah, me too.
All right, Joey. It's now time to separate fact from fiction. It's time for some myth busting.
Dun, dun, dun.
Myth number 1, personalized education requires expensive technology.
Nah, personalized education, I think, can require some technology, but I think we talked a lot today about some quick and easy strategies, relationship building, how we're responding with feedback, giving students choice, voice, and agency. Those are things that are really quick strategies to employ to achieve greater personalization.
All right. Thank you for busting that number 1 myth. Myth number 2, personalized learning just means using AI.
Listen, I am all for AI, but personalized learning is just as much about the relationship building between a teacher and a student as it is about these new hot digital platforms that students can use.
Myth number 3, teachers don't have time to personalize learning.
It does take time. And we talked about how it takes flexibility and intention as well. So, and when you first start doing it, it will take a little more time, but you develop some fluency with that. And it's just around being deliberate. So I don't think we can say personalization takes too much time, because that shuts us off from exploring what personalization can look like to us. Now, again, it depends on what your setting is. So you have to do what personalization looks like for you, given where you're at. And that's going to look different for everyone. So go for it. Try it out. And I bet it won't take that much time.
Joie, thank you so much for being here with us, for your heart and your expertise and bringing all of those beautiful student stories to light. I know, again, we're so passionate about personalized learning. It really does make a difference. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Joie.
You know your child learns a little differently than other kids, but maybe you're not yet sure what that means. That's why Fusion Academy created a short quiz to help you better understand your students' learning DNA. In just a few minutes, you'll get personalized insights into your students' unique learning preferences, plus tips to better support them at home and in the classroom. Take the quiz today. It's quick, it's free, and it may just unlock your students' full potential. Visit fusionacademy.com/podcast. That's fusionacademy.com/podcast. We know learning differently requires showing up differently. So here are some tools, insights, and strategies to help. It's time for Real Talk, Real Tools. For students who learn differently, a one-to-one personalized school setting can be life-changing, not because it makes learning easier, but because it makes learning fit. In a one-to-one classroom, the teacher doesn't just deliver content. They respond to the student in real time. That means pacing, teaching style, even the format of assignments can flex to what works best. One student might need verbal check-ins every 10 minutes to stay on task. Another might thrive when given freedom to stand, to move, or sketch while listening. In a one-to-one format, that kind of adaptation is not a special exception. It's just how learning happens. Try this at home. Ask your child, when did school feel easiest or most interesting for you? Use their answer to start a conversation with teachers about what works and why. And if you're in a traditional school setting, know this. You can still advocate for personalized support. Start by sharing what helps your child learn best and ask for small, flexible adjustments, extended time, alternative formats, movement breaks, or verbal check-ins. Personalization isn't about lowering expectations. It's about unlocking potential, and every student deserves to learn in a way that honors who they are.
Lynna, that is so well said. And I'm thinking about what Joie just taught us about personalization and learning. I'm wondering if we can continue to encourage and challenge parents to be able to keep those open lines of communication with the teachers in their students' lives. Oftentimes that curtain is kind of drawn shut at the high school level, in which we say, I know this as a parent. I drop off the kid and guess what? It's the school's issue. I think that we need to challenge parents to be able to continue to be advocates for their children, give that feedback of what's going on at home, as well as give them some insights into the conversations of what kids are finding challenging in terms of the work that's getting assigned, the relevancy of the projects, as well as just overall their learning styles and what resonates with them.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think it's, what we mentioned was this neurodiverse affirming practice of giving permission for families to ask the right questions, to advocate for their child deeply in a way that will actually be powerful to them and make things different.
Let's take the shame out of thinking my kid is going to be struggling and needs all this extra help. We're just trying to get the kids what they deserve in terms of their learning experiences in school.
Yeah. And as a parent, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want their child to feel seen and known and heard? It's just so powerful.
That's that beauty of connection and human relationship that we all crave. And it's really, really difficult when it's a teacher in front of a classroom of 30.
Exactly. Yeah. Not only do we crave it, we require it. We require it for us to be successful, to learn, to actually self-actualize ourselves.
Yeah. It's all part of becoming an adult, isn't it?
I went to numerous different schools, public, private, all traditional schools, but coming to Fusion, I've immediately felt supported and safe and secure, and those feelings of abandonment that I had at traditional school were completely gone. I found myself so excited to be here, to the point where I'd come here early, even if I didn't have class, just so I could see my friends and see my teachers.
The teachers were able to inspire him and get him to be passionate about subjects again, which he had completely lost in the public school system. And they would report that he would come in excited, that he would engage in dialogue with them where he would know more than they did because he went home to study about it. He had a sports marketing class where he was able to do a unit on his favorite soccer team, which he'd been obsessed with for years. So he was given the opportunity to bring something in from his personal life into an academic environment. So, that kind of thing usually is not possible in the public school system.
I had lost my love for learning, and that was given back by Fusion.
Fusion was a life changer for him and for us as parents.
Fusion unlocked my full potential. Now I'm heading off to college, I'm playing water polo. I never thought I'd be in this position, and I wouldn't be without Fusion.
And now, my favorite part of the show, where the numbers, the neuroscience, and the public policy intersect. It's time for the Research Roundup. Lynna, we have a bunch today because we have so much first-party data on personalized education at Fusion. And just a couple to start with. Fusion Academy students' achievement scores grow 41% more in a school year than their peers nationally, according to NWA MAP data. And specifically, our students' math scores grow 2 times more in a school year than their peers nationally. But there's so much third-party data that shows the power of personalization as well. A study by Fryer, Howard, and Novak that found how one-on-one education significantly boosted reading achievement for middle school students. Research from Zhao, Molfino, and Travers showing that personalized learning helps students catch up on missed concepts faster after learning disruptions. Meta-analyses by Robinson, Kraft, Loeb, and Schuler confirming that one-to-one instruction is especially effective for students who have fallen behind academically. And a study from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation showing that students in personalized learning environments report higher levels of engagement and self-confidence. But finally, perhaps the most important stat, the fact that only 17% of teachers feel well prepared to teach students with learning differences, according to the National Centers for Learning Disabilities. That's why so many kids with learning, social, and emotional differences are underserved in the traditional school environments. And that's why schools like Fusion Academy exist. That makes me think of a student that I met a few years ago. His name's Michael. And when I sat him down in my office and I said, "Hey, Michael, what are you into? What excites you about school?" He gave me the pretty typical teenage answer of nothing, right? And I'm looking at him, he's kind of slouched over, and I look down at his shoes, and he's got a pair of the coolest sneakers, and I know you and your husband are into sneakers as well. And I said, "Michael, what's up with those shoes, man?" And he said, "Well, actually, I'm kind of into fashion." And I'm looking at this kid, and I'm like, "You're into fashion?" He's sweatpants, maybe a mustard stain on his shirt. And you're into fashion? That's awesome. Tell me more. Turns out this kid hadn't been going to school for 3 months because he didn't feel like he could catch up. He didn't feel seen in school, but he was working on the side project in which he was building a small business, buying, selling, and trading sneakers. I said, "Oh my gosh, Michael, here at Fusion, what we're going to do for you is we're going to design courses that revolve around your interests." We signed him up for financial stats. He took a graphic design class to be able to design his logo for his business. He was able to create an inventory system to track all the shoes that he was buying and selling. At that point, when I had met him, college was not in the future. Now, zoom forward to the day before graduation. It's been a while since I've talked to him. "Michael, what are you doing next year? What are you into?" He's like, "Mike, I think I found the secret to life and what I want to do." I go, "That's profound, dude. What is it?" He goes, "I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it." And I go, "Wow, me too." But he goes, No, man. I found out that for me to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it, I need to have a stable financial background. And that's why next year I'm going to go to college and I'm going to major in business. And I said, well, what about the shoe business, man? He goes, listen, that's a hobby and I never want it to be my job or else I'll lose the joy in it. And so from being in a place where he wasn't going to school for months to a place where he was excited about going to a university, to me, that was why I stay in education.
It's like you saw him in that moment, right? You saw him in that moment. He had a love for the sneaker game, right? I can identify with that. And love for the sneaker game. And I can just imagine how that translated into the classroom for him, right? So you said he had a graphic design class. I can see the teachers taking apart how to design a sneaker and him being fully invested, and the inspiration of like student agency coming forth and really showing up for him, probably maybe even for the first time ever, because we were able to understand what he really loved and translate that to a classroom setting.
I think it was so exciting for this young man to see adults around him just as excited for him about what he was interested in. And that was the secret to unlocking his learning.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much for joining us on Learning Differently. We're grateful that you're here, doing the work, asking the questions, and showing up for the students who need it most. Supporting learners who think and experience the world differently takes curiosity, care, and corazón, heart. Because when we understand how they learn,
we unlock who they can become.
See you next time.